I'm a man with two faces. My story is a long and interesting one, but most people don't bother to hear it. They can't get past my face. I'm used to people's reactions to me like that. And I've been this way since my 20s, and I've lived in seclusion ever since. When I was 19, I was in a horrible car accident. A friend was drunk and shouldn't have been driving. I think back to that night all the time. I wonder how differently my life would have been if I had taken the keys away from him that night. Brent was the cool guy at school. He had the car, the looks, the money, anything else a teenager would need to rule the school. We had a fledgling friendship, and we had just started hanging out together. He invited me to a party that night, and I was beyond excited to go. All the popular kids would be there, not to mention Mary, the girl I had a crush on. I'd just gotten my license, so I wasn't really the most confident driver yet, and I noticed Brent was drinking a lot. I was starting to feel uneasy about getting into the car with him. I mean, he was cool, though, so I didn't want to say anything and have him think that I was deeply uncool. But once the party was starting to wind down, Brent grabbed his keys and said, "Let's blow this popsicle stand." I asked him if he was okay to drive, and he just raised his arms in the air and said, "Don't I look okay to drive?" Well, since you mentioned it, that's what I started to say, but he interrupted me and said, "I've had my license for a year. I know when I can drive and when I can't. If you have a problem with it, you can walk home. Come to think of it, maybe you won't want to come with me to these parties again." No, I said quickly. That was the last thing I wanted, was to be cut out of the parties and the cool crowd. I felt like Brent was my in for Mary, too. I mean, there was no way I was going to mess that up. So I slid into the passenger seat as Brent started the car. We pulled out onto the road, and for a brief moment I thought everything would be fine and that I had been a stick in the mud for nothing. As Brent kept increasing his speed, though, the worrybirds started circling again. I passively suggested he might want to slow down, but that only made him go faster. I was starting to get that Brent wasn't somebody that was used to being questioned, and the more I suggested he was doing something he shouldn't be, the madder he got and the more he seemed to want to prove me wrong. As we hit the highway, I didn't even know how fast we were going. I was gripping the door, and that made Brent laugh and toss his head back. He was definitely enjoying my discomfort. As we rounded a corner, all I remember seeing were bright lights, the kind that you automatically close your eyes to. And the next thing I know, there's a deafening sound, glass everywhere. The car is rolling and rolling and rolling. When I opened my eyes, I was upside down. My seatbelt was fortunately holding me into the seat. I turned my head to the driver's seat, but Brent wasn't there. My mind flashed back to when he got in the car, and I noticed he didn't put his seatbelt on, so he must have been thrown clear of the wreck. I tried to unbuckle the belt, but it seemed to be stuck. I could smell gas, and I also saw there were some small flames on the road surrounding us. I looked around and realized that with the gas leaking everywhere and the open flames, the car would likely explode. I had to get out. Well, I tried and tried, but the more I struggled, the more the belt seemed to tighten up. And before I knew it, the one side of the car lit on fire, and I was trapped. I frantically looked for something I could use to cut the belt, but I couldn't reach anything. At that moment, the trucker that we had driven into was bending down at my window asking if I was okay. I told him I couldn't get out. So he reached into his pocket, and I have never before been so happy to see somebody with a Swiss Army knife. He started sawing through the belt, but the flames were getting closer and closer to my side of the car. He managed to cut through the belt and started to pull me out, and just as he was pulling me out, I could feel some intense heat, and I realized the flames were crawling up my arm and to the side of my face. I was screaming, and he was dabbing my face and arm with his coat to try and put out the flames. I'll never forget that smell as long as I live. I was rushed to the hospital, and I was treated for 4th-degree burns on the left side of my face and my left arm. Brent had been killed. He'd been thrown so far from the vehicle, it was suspected that he died on impact. That was a big mistake he made driving that night, but I wonder if he deserved to pay that high of a price for it. My arm healed and was usable, but my face, it was scarred for life. The whole left side was unrecognizable. Mary had gone from being the most important thing on my mind to being the last thing I thought about. There was no way I was ever going to get a girlfriend now, much less marry. So I pushed her and every other girl out of my mind. My parents sued Brent's parents for Brent's negligence, and we won the case, so my hospital bills were paid for, and I was awarded a hefty sum for damages. Turns out wrecking somebody's face was considered quite a serious thing. After I quit school, I realized I wanted to live the life of a recluse. I hated being out in public. Everyone stared at me. It was okay if people looked at the right side of my face, but the second I turned, I got that horrified look. Mothers went so far as to pull their children away from me. Store clerks couldn't look me in the eye. Even my parents had a hard time looking at me sometimes. I could see the tears streaming down my mother's cheeks once in a while. It was all more than I could take. So I used my settlement money to buy an old dilapidated house in the woods, and I took to fixing it up myself. That was how I filled my days. I had 5 dogs and 2 cats. See, animals didn't see my face, or they did, but they didn't react to it. So their company was all I could stand. The thought of spending my entire life this way, it seemed sad, but it's also kind of what made me feel comfortable. I'd seen a couple plastic surgeons discuss surgery to fix my face, but the process was really invasive and time-consuming, not to mention painful and expensive. So I had the choice of either using my settlement money for surgery to fix my face or to use it to live out the rest of my life in solitude. And I chose the latter. I lived out my days in silence and solitude. When some kids stumbled upon my cabin in the woods one day, they screamed and ran away. The next day they were back with more kids. No one believed that they had seen that monster in the woods, so they had to bring along their friends to prove it. I could see them hiding in the surrounding woods, waiting for me to come out. I had a little fun with it, and I purposely did not go outside that day. I was actually pretty impressed with their patience and determination. I mean, they waited for hours. It wasn't until it started to rain that they finally left. But they were back the very next day, and the day after that, and that day I decided I would take some mercy on them. I could see a storm was coming, and the last thing I wanted was to have children stranded out here and have to come in. So I walked outside and started chopping wood. I could hear their whispers, and in a mischievous moment I decided to whirl around, wave the axe in the air menacingly, and loud ramble like a madman. The kids instantly screamed and took off into the bushes. Remembering those screams and the looks on their faces when they looked from my face to the axe, man, that was priceless. That was the first time I had laughed so hard in years. Well, the next day I was shocked to see one of the boys was spying on me again. One seemed more manageable, so I went outside and called out, "What can I do for you, young man?" The boy was shocked. I'm sure he thought that he was totally camouflaged, but he answered me saying, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't mean to disturb you. I just really wanted to meet you and talk to you." "And why would you want to do that?" I asked. He told me how people in town were talking about me. They talked about this awful story. They talked about what happened to you and how you chose to live out here on your own with no company at all. "I thought you might be lonely, that's all." He looked awkwardly down at his feet after saying that. Nice kid. I had to admit I was enjoying this lost art of conversing all of a sudden. I'm a man with 2 faces, and it seemed that for the first time since the accident, I actually might have a friend, and somebody who wasn't totally repulsed by looking at me. To watch more animated story videos like this, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments section what you thought about this story.